So this is the second video for chapter 2. This is on adding rational numbers, and it goes with section 2.2 in the book. So there's the pages, and our target today is just to be able to add rational numbers. But remember, rational numbers means it could be fractions, it could be decimals, it could be positive, it could be negative. So we're going to look at different examples of each type. Here's our first one that we'll do together. So you've done adding decimals before, and we just know we have to line up the decimal places and the place values and then just add. But here you'll notice that we have a negative. So now we're adding decimals, but one or both of them might be negatives. So if you remember from chapter 1, when we add two numbers and the signs are different, so I have one positive and one negative, then we have to find the difference. Means we have to actually subtract them and then keep the sign of whichever one is larger. So that's just a little reminder about how we add to, integers when I have one, well, these aren't integers, rational numbers where I have one positive and one negative. So if I'm going to find the difference, I have to set up an actual subtraction problem. So just take the bigger number, subtract the smaller number so we can find the difference between them. Okay, if you remember, you can't take 5 away from 2, so we have to borrow. If you remember this, borrow from the next place value over. So now I'm doing 12 minus 5 is 7. 5 minus 0 is 5. Bring down my decimal point. 7 minus 4 is 3. So the difference between them is 3.57. And I keep the sign of whichever number was bigger. In this original problem, the positive was bigger. So positive 3.57 is my answer. So this whole section is going to be combining what you already know about decimals and fractions, but now adding in the negatives and putting it together with the rules we learned for integers in chapter 1. So on the next page you have two examples. Let's take a look at them quick before you pause and try them. In number 4 here, this example, again I have one positive and one negative, so I'm going to have to find the difference there, keep the sign of the bigger number. And then notice your signs here in this one. Think about what you're going to do to get that answer. So pause it and try those now, and then come back and check. So in the first one, I had a positive and a negative, which means I have to find the difference. So I subtracted and got 2.8. Keep the sign of the larger number, which was a positive here, so positive 2.8. In the next example, I had two negatives. Well, those two negatives are actually going to combine to make a bigger negative. So I added the values up, got 12.45, and since I'm putting negatives and more negatives together, I actually got negative 12.45 for my answer. If you go into the next section, now what if we have to add fractions? But remember, we're going to see some negatives thrown in too. So here's the one we'll do together. Negative 8/3 and 5/6. Well, if you remember from fractions, we know we have to have common denominators. So I'll start there. The second one's already good to go. If I use a common denominator of 6, the 5/6 is already fine. So I just have to change the negative 8/3 into my common denominator of 6. So to get that, I had to multiply by 2. Right? The 3, the denominator, multiplied by 2 to get to 6. And so the 8 multiplied by 2 would give me 16. And it was a negative, so it's still negative 16/6. And now I'm adding those two numbers together. Well, go back to your rules for integers. If I have one positive and one negative number and I add them together, I'm actually going to find the difference. So I have to find the difference between 16/6 and 5/6. And if I do that subtraction, I should realize that I would have 11. Okay, 11/6 there as my final answer. But think back to this original problem. The negative, here's my negative, the negative was bigger. So after I find the difference between them, I keep the sign of whichever one was bigger. Negative 11/6. So looking at your paper, there's 2 for you to practice. They're fractions. Remember, when we're adding and subtracting, think about what we already know about fractions. We're going to have to consider least common denominators, and then we're also going to have to consider whether we have some positives or negatives and what the rules are there. So pause, try both of these, make sure you actually do them, and then come back and we'll go over the answers. Okay, let's look these over. In the first one here, let me change color so you can see. Whoops. In the first one here, I had to get common denominators, so I changed them both into eighths. The first one already was 8s, good to go. This one had to be multiplied by 4. So I got, or sorry, by 2, so I got 2 8s. Now I have one negative and one positive, so I had to find the difference. The difference between 7 and 2 is 5 8s. And my negative here was bigger, so it's a negative final answer. Keep the negative on your final answer. Number 2, I changed them to improper fractions, so I got negative 19 thirds and then 20 thirds, just brought that down. Since I have different signs, one positive, one negative, I have to find the difference. The difference between 20 and 19 right here was 1. And because the positive was bigger, it's going to be a positive 1/3 for my answer. Okay, the directions say here to evaluate. That's the next type of problem. And when they say evaluate, they just mean work it out and get an answer. But they've given you this expression here, 2x plus y. And then they tell you when x is equal to 1/4 and y is equal to negative 3/2. So they've given me what x and y are, but I need to go and plug them in. So anytime you see something like this where they tell you what the variable is, plug that in for the variable in the expression and rewrite it. So I'm going to rewrite it with the x and the y both filled in there where they go. So that would look like this. I have 2, and then x is equal to 1/4, and then I'm adding, and y is equal to negative 3/2. Okay, so I've got a couple things going on here. We're going to have to follow order of operations. Order of operations never goes away. Remember that says to do parentheses first, then exponents. I don't have either of those, so I just am going to start with multiplying and dividing. So I do see some multiplying and dividing right here. 2 times 1/4. Well, if it makes it easier, think of that as 2 over 1. Multiply the numerators, multiply the denominators, and I get 2/4. Okay, I'm going to leave it like that actually, even though I could simplify it, because it looks like that might be a handy common denominator to use, to leave it as fourths. So bring everything else down. And now I see it's just an addition problem. And yep, it looks like we need common denominators between these, so I'll rewrite it. Common denominator would be 4, so the 2/4 can stay the way it is. And the negative 3/2 needs to be written as fourths. So this is going to be multiplied by 2 to get it into fourths. So 3 times 2 would give me that. And it was negative. So now I'm adding two fractions. One's a positive, one's a negative. That means I need to come over here and find the difference between 6 and 2. Well, that difference is 4, so 4/4. But remember, when we have one positive and one negative, we need to go back and look and see which sign was larger. Looks like the negative was larger, so I'd get negative 4/4 for a final answer. But that can just be reduced or simplified to -1. Okay, so when we do evaluating, take the values they give you, plug them in where they go, rewrite the whole thing, then look and follow order of operations and follow all your rules for integers, for positive and negative numbers, and work it out. Okay, so there's one more for you to try. Looks like this. They give you what A is and they give you what B is. You just have to put it in. So pause and try both of these, work them out, and then we'll go over the answers. I wanted to show you part way. Here all I did was plug in, like I plugged in the value for A and the value for B, and the value for A and the value for B here, and I just rewrote it. So once you get this part, now you can actually keep going and solve it, work it out, get an answer. So pause again and finish it from here. Okay, to check these, in the first one, I did my multiplication first. So I multiplied those together and got 4/2. Just brought down everything else. When I'm adding a positive and a negative fraction, they already have common denominators, but I just have to find the difference between the -5 and the 4. And that was a difference of 1, but the negative was bigger, so I made it a negative answer. So quick note, it doesn't matter if you wrote it like this, if you write it like this, or if you put the negative out front in the middle. All of those are just -1/2, so they're all correct. In number 8 here, looks like I have to add two fractions. Again, the common denominators already match, so I'm good there. but I have one positive and one negative, so I need to find the difference, and I totally messed that up. The difference between 5 and 1 should be 4. There we go. Negative 4 over 2, so ignore this. Negative 4 over 2 can be simplified to negative 2, but I'm still going to take the absolute value of that. Absolute value of negative 2 is 2. So that's your final answer. All right, that was the end of video 2. Thanks.